we're unpacking the epic, 500-year historical reality of Scotland's fight for independence. We're going to explain the full story here, from the early unification of fiercely independent clans all the way to a truly revolutionary declaration of sovereignty that literally shook the medieval world. It's a crazy story of survival, brutal military tactics, and just an unbreakable will. I'm absolutely thrilled to dive into this with you, so let's get started.
Here's a quick look at our agenda so you can see exactly how we'll explain the full story today. We'll start with the trap at Bannockburn, then look at forging the Scottish nation, the real Macbeth and kings, the struggle for the crown, Wallace and the resistance, and wrap up with independence and popular sovereignty.
Section 1. The Trap at Bannockburn.
Let's drop right into the action in 1314. The sheer mismatch in military power here is absolutely staggering. You have the English king, Edward II, bringing a massive, seemingly invincible war machine up north. We're talking 20,000 soldiers, including 3,000 elite heavy cavalry. His goal? Wipe out the Scottish king, Robert the Bruce, in one crushing strike. And on the flip side, the Scottish army had only about 8,000 troops, and they were mostly just infantry. On paper, there's no way the Scots walk away from this, right? But, wars aren't fought on paper. The Scots use these brilliant formations called schiltrins. Imagine impenetrable, living walls of spears held by incredibly disciplined infantry. Robert the Bruce knew he couldn't outmaneuver the massive English army, so he forced them to fight on this narrow, marshy, muddy terrain. Suddenly, the huge size of the English army was a fatal burden. Those elite heavy horses got completely bogged down in the mud, losing all their momentum, and as the knights sank into the marsh, the heavily outnumbered Scottish schiltrins launched a crushing counterattack, turning a guaranteed English victory into a total panicked retreat. Seeing a massive underdog victory like that really makes you pause and ask, where on earth did these unbreakable fighters come from? How do you forge that kind of iron discipline? Well, to answer that, we actually need to rewind the clock all the way back to the 9th century. Section 2. Forging the Scottish nation. Early Scotland definitely wasn't built in a day. Back in the early Middle Ages, northern Britain was shared by the ancient Picts and the Gaelic Scots, who had come over by sea from Ireland. Then, in the mid-9th century, an ambitious ruler named Kenneth MacAlpin aggressively conquered the Picts. He brought these two peoples together to form the Kingdom of Alba, which is the true foundation of modern Scotland. He even established a new capital at Scone and moved the famous Stone of Scone there, cementing it as the sacred coronation relic for every future Scottish king. But here's the catch. Scotland's rugged geography created some intense divides. Up in the harsh mountainous highlands, a totally different culture was brewing. Royal power up there was pretty much non-existent. Instead, society was this complex mosaic of clans, and let me tell you, loyalty to your clan chief absolutely outweighed loyalty to any distant king sitting on a throne down south. These clans were toughened by constant, brutal survival struggles against coastal Viking raids, proving that the foundation of the nation was really its resilient people fighting for their own land. Section 3. The real Macbeth and kings. Okay, we've all heard of Shakespeare's Macbeth, right? The treacherous, backstabbing usurper. But the historical reality is way more fascinating. The real historical figure did kill Scottish King Duncan I in 1040, but actually, scratch that midnight assassination idea. It happened during an open war when Duncan tried to seize Macbeth's territory. And far from being a tyrant who quickly fell apart, the real Macbeth ruled Scotland stably and successfully for 17 whole years before being defeated. Following the era of Macbeth, Scotland hit this period of massive modernization, starting with Queen Margaret and peaking under her son, King David I. Historians literally call it the Davidian Revolution. David fundamentally upgraded the state. He founded new towns, he introduced Scotland's very first minted coinage, and he created thriving regional markets. He even invited Norman and Flemish settlers to bring European feudal structures and modern governance into the country. It was a golden age of sorts. Section 4. The struggle for the crown. But that stability? It collapsed like a house of cards. Looking at this timeline, you can see how quickly things went wrong. In 1286, King Alexander III dies without a male heir. Their only hope, his young granddaughter Margaret, tragically dies on her way to Scotland in 1290. The country plunges into chaos. And in a massive miscalculation, the divided Scottish nobles ask the powerful English king Edward I to pick the next king. Big mistake. Edward picks John Balliol as a convenient puppet, treats Scotland like a vassal state, and relentlessly humiliates Balliol until he finally snaps and rebels in 1295. By 1296, Edward deposes him, and boom, we are in all-out war. And Edward, I wanted to make a point. He didn't just defeat the Scottish army and throw their king in the Tower of London. He marched right into the ancient capital and literally stole the Stone of Scone. He took the most sacred symbol of the Scottish monarchy back to Westminster Abbey in London and shoved it under the English coronation chair. It was a deeply calculated, humiliating act of total subjugation. He was telling them, your royal authority belongs to England now.
Section 5. Wallace and the resistance. But out of that deep humiliation rose a fierce resistance. Enter William Wallace. This guy managed to do exactly what the nobles couldn't: unite the Scottish forces. At the Battle of Stirling Bridge in 1297, the Scots were heavily outnumbered again, about 6,000 Scots against 9,000 English soldiers and 2,000 terrifying heavy cavalry. But Wallace was a tactical genius. He just waited. He let a portion of the English forces cross a very narrow bridge, and before the rest could follow, he sprang the trap. The English elite knights were totally cut off, trapped in a confined space, and completely slaughtered. It was a game changer.
Now, despite that incredible victory, Wallace's triumph was tragically short-lived. King Edward I came back with a vengeance, and eventually, in 1305, Wallace was captured, handed over to the English, and brutally executed for treason in London. But Edward made a critical error here. He thought a brutal execution would kill the rebellion, but it spurred the idea of freedom like wildfire. Wallace became a martyr, an immortal legend of resistance that united the Scottish people and is still inspiring us today.
Section 6. Independence and popular sovereignty. The torch of resistance then passed to Robert the Bruce, and his path to power was, frankly, incredibly messy. In 1306, during a tense meeting inside a church, Bruce actually murdered his fiercest political rival right in front of the altar. It was a shocking scandal that got him excommunicated by the Pope, but he seized the crown anyway. Despite suffering brutal early defeats and being forced into hiding, he launched this agonizing, brilliant guerrilla campaign. Piece by piece, he took his country back, ultimately leading to that spectacular underdog victory at Bannockburn we talked about earlier. After Bannockburn, the Scots took things to a whole new level. In 1320, they sent a letter to the Pope known as the Declaration of Arbroath. Look at this quote. It stated that the authority of the king comes from the people, and if a ruler betrays the country, the people have the absolute right to remove him. You have to understand, for the Middle Ages, this concept of popular sovereignty was revolutionary. It completely redefined what a nation and a monarch were actually supposed to be.
20,000. That's the amount in pounds sterling that Scotland paid to England in the 1328 Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton. After Edward II died under some pretty mysterious circumstances, England finally wanted peace. Scotland paid this sum, the treaty was ratified, and England finally legally recognized Scotland as a fully independent state with Robert the Bruce as its lawful king. The 500-year struggle we've been tracking finally found its resolution.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really chew on. We've seen how Scotland wasn't born in a single day. It was forged in the mud of Bannockburn, in the fierce loyalty of the Highland clans, and through centuries of relentless endurance. So, how does the memory of a 500-year struggle, where everyday people ultimately proved that they, not distant kings or empires, hold the true power, continue to shape the very DNA of Scotland's identity today? It's an absolutely remarkable story of how the idea of freedom proved stronger than the sword.